Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense, appeared before our Armed Services Committee, and I asked him the question, Mr. Secretary, do you think Congress should debate and authorize a new AUMF for the Middle East? He said, that is not my responsibility, but my answer would be is yes. So it is not fair or right for our men and women in uniform to have the Congress sitting on the sidelines when those of us in both parties want to meet our constitutional responsibility. In closing, I will send another letter today, and hopefully many of my colleagues standing here today will join me. I want to remind Mr. Ryan that he is denying members of Congress their constitutional duty, that we are sworn to uphold the Constitution, and one of those duties is to vote whether we send our young men and women to die or not. So Barbara Lee, thank you and everyone here today for this opportunity to join you so that we can meet our constitutional responsibility and keep our word to God that if we're going to send his young men and women to give their life and their limbs, then we must have a debate and we must vote on the floor of the House on a new AUMF authorization of military force. Thank you.
I'm Congressman Jim McGovern from Massachusetts. I want to thank Congresswoman Lee and my colleagues here for being at this press conference. We're here today for one simple reason, and that is when it comes to America's war against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, Congress is missing in action. In recent weeks, we have seen the U.S. send more and more troops to Iraq and Syria, and congressional leaders aren't even batting an eye. Make no mistake, we are expanding our military footprint in these conflicts. We are putting more Americans in harm's way. We are spending unlimited amounts of the taxpayer dollars. We're actually borrowing money to pay for these wars. And we are engaged in endless wars that have no end game in sight. The good news is that there is an increasing bipartisan group that is growing more and more to do something about that. Last November, I led a letter from a bipartisan group of 35 House lawmakers calling on Speaker Ryan to let Congress debate and vote on an AUMF for this war. In December, Speaker Ryan said that an AUMF would be a top priority for 2016. But 6 months later, we are still waiting. And that's why I'm here today with Republicans and Democrats to say enough is enough. Our brave men and women in uniform are doing their duty. If Congress is too damn chicken to do its duty by voting on whether to authorize this war, then we should bring our troops home. As the House prepares to take up the NDAA, I want to remind our congressional leaders that the NDAA itself says that no funds in the Overseas Contingency Operations, the so-called OCO account, can be obligated after April 30th, 2017. The reason these funds are cut off in April 2017 is so that the next president and the next Congress can figure out how much funding they need for the active U.S. military operations and to get that funding level approved by Congress. Now, I will be offering an amendment to the NDAA which simply says no more money can be obligated or expended for the deployment of U.S. troops in Iraq or Syria after April 30th if an AUMF hasn't been enacted. Plain and simple, no AUMF, no money to deploy troops in the air, on the water, or boots on the ground for Iraq or Syria. 2 years ago, when President Obama announced that we were going back into Iraq, he said that the most critical element of success was for all the actors in Iraq to be respected, to be included, and for political reconciliation to occur. He was right. But what we see instead is Iraqis storming the parliament and an Iraq more fractured than ever before. No number of U.S. troops on the ground in Iraq can fill the political vacuum there or heal those wounds. For nearly 2 years, Congress has failed to carry out its constitutional duty to approve an AUMF for the war against ISIS. Our troops carry out their duty, but not the lawmakers who send them into harm's way. The President sent an AUMF to Congress nearly 15 months ago. I have great reservations about that proposal. But whether you support the President and want to give him more authority or want to put more restrictions on an AUMF, Congress must act. Americans deserve a Congress with the courage to do its job when it comes to war. To do nothing is moral cowardice. Enough is enough. No AUMF, no money. It's that simple.
No boots in Syria, thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here, and I want to thank my friend and colleague, Congresswoman Lee, for your leadership in this matter. We're here not debating or trying to advance a preference, but instead a deeply held principle. This matter concerns the balance of power, and it concerns ultimately when we've put America's treasure, our young men and women, into harm's way. I have the privilege of serving and representing a very special district, Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. It's home to more men and women in uniform of all 435 congressional districts. Now, I know each and every one of us has service members, so I'm not saying that I care more. I certainly don't. But it's never outside of my mind the responsibility that we have to our young men and women to give them everything they need to be successful should we ask them to go into harm's way. Now, we've already heard about Secretary Carter and his position on this matter. Let me reference a Marine that I hold in high regard. He's our nation's highest uniformed officer, General Joe Dunford, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said in unequivocal terms that the passage of an AUMF would be helpful in the fight against ISIS. Now, full stop at that point, right there, that's enough for me. But you've got the constitutional argument that is clear. And I am among those who do not agree that the AUMF that both some Republicans and some Democrats have relied upon is a solid foundation. To me, it's crumbling. It's not legally binding or standing in any respect. So our Speaker Ryan, has said that he supports the debate and passage of an AUMF. I respectfully but unequivocally call on him to advance that. Now, I too have offered an amendment regarding this matter, and I appreciate those who have also introduced amendments. The amendment that I'm offering advances a bipartisan, bicameral AUMF joined by Senator Flake, Senator Tim Kaine, a fellow Virginian, and my good friend and colleague Peter Welch. So this is an important matter. I thank you all for being here today, and next speaking to you is going to be Peter Welch. Thank you.
America is at war. Just less than 2 weeks ago on May 3rd, Navy SEAL Charles Keating was killed in combat. Yet, if it's the job of soldiers to fight, it's the job of legislators to legislate. If it's the Constitution requirement that war can only be authorized by Congress, it's the legislative duty of all of us here to debate and vote on an authorization for war. We can have a debate about what that should be. What we can't do is fail to even show up for work and do our job. We're disregarding the Constitution, even as our soldiers are defending America abroad, without any congressional vote whatsoever. I agree with my colleagues, I agree with Representative McGovern. No authorization, there should be no money, and the troops should come home. We can remedy that by having a debate on the floor, saying yes or no to an authorization and taking responsibility to do what the Constitution requires of each of us. Thank you.
I want to thank Barbara Lee and Walter Jones, my colleagues, for leading this effort to get us a debate on the floor of the House. Look, there are 8 members here today, and if you asked each of us what should our strategy be, I'm sure we would all have 8 different answers. So it's debatable how we should engage ISIS and whether we should engage in a civil war in Syria. But what's not debatable is whether we should debate. I mean, the Constitution is unambiguous on this point. It is our duty to have this debate, especially when we're going to send our men and women to die on these missions. You know, this mission had mission creep before it started. In 2013, senators in my own party and our president wanted to engage in a civil war in Syria before ISIS was known to us, largely to the public. And now, even today, it's not clear what our mission in Syria is. Are we engaged in a civil war against the leader, the dictator of Syria, or are we engaged in combat against ISIS? These are things that we need to debate. We need to set boundaries on the executive branch when the executive branch is directing our soldiers overseas. And so I would just say this, that we owe it to our men and women who are going to fight for us, who are going to defend our country, to give them a clear mission, a winnable mission, and to give them the resources to complete that mission. Thank you.
On January 5th, 2015, 435 representatives of the American people and about 35 members of the Senate pledged to uphold the Constitution. All of us did, a few new members in the intervening years. We've failed. We have simply not carried out our constitutional responsibility. As was cited earlier, James Madison wrote about this and about the enormous responsibility. They didn't give it to the president because they didn't want one person. If we're going to go to war, they said, when they wrote the Constitution, they wanted the American public to be fully informed and fully engaged. That's the only way you could possibly win a war, and it's the only way you could possibly avoid a war. Never give that responsibility to a single person, the President of the United States. But that is in fact what we have done. We must act. We have no other duty but to carry out the Constitution, and in this particular way, we call it an authorization to use military force. It's an act of war, and that's our responsibility. There are several different proposals about how to define that responsibility. That's what the debate should be. How long should it be open? 3 years, 5 years, any number of years? Should there be boots on the ground or not? Should it be only airstrikes? And, as was just said, who are we fighting? Are we fighting Assad? Are we fighting ISIS? Are we fighting some other elements in the area? It's our responsibility to clearly define. And when we clearly define, then the authority and the obligation rests with the President to carry out those responsibilities as defined by the representatives of the American people, both the Senate and the House. It's in the Constitution. It could not be more clear, nor could the dereliction of duty of the current representatives in the Senate and the House in failing to carry out this most fundamental and most awesome of responsibilities. So, Mr. Speaker, give us the debate. Give us the floor. Don't have to go through committee. Put the ideas on the floor. Put aside all of the foolishness that we're presently carrying out in the House behind us, and get down to the real business of life and death, of the responsibility that was given to us by the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, open the floor to a debate on whether this nation should be involved in Syria and Iraq, and if we are to be involved, what limitations should be put upon that involvement. Mr. Speaker, let us carry out our constitutional responsibilities.
I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from the 9th Congressional District of Illinois, and I am so grateful to my dear friend and colleague, Representative Barbara Lee, for bringing together this group of members who speak, I think, for a lot of others who aren't here today. It is not that often that we gather on the House at the House Triangle for a press conference where we have bipartisan spokespeople asking and members asking for the same thing. And what we're asking for today is that the Speaker of the House immediately call a vote on authorization for use of military force. We can't any longer shirk our duty by avoiding a vote on a new AUMF. The Constitution has been invoked today. Clearly, that is our obligation to decide when our men and women are sent into war. But it is so much more than that. You know, when we make this awesome decision, when that decision is made, we are saying that it is worth it for our young men and women to be sent off potentially to die in conflict. And this is the obligation of the members of Congress to bring their knowledge, to bring their hearts to that discussion. And yet we haven't been able to have that conversation. And we, I believe, need to narrow authorizations so that Congress truly engages in the debate over the use of our military every time the president wants to go to war. Relying on a 15-year-old authorization fails that objective. I don't believe that any AUMF should exist in perpetuity. It is time to end this one right now. So everyone has said it. Join my colleagues in asking the Republican Speaker of the House to call for a vote right now.
Let me thank all of our colleagues for being here and for their tremendous leadership. I mean, the majority of our members have really been calling for this and demanding a debate and a vote for many years now. And so this is another step in that direction in terms of making sure that the American people understand the costs and the consequences of this war. And until we have that debate, we will not, the public will not know what those costs and consequences are. So thank you again very much. We'll open for a couple of questions.
Congressman?